Ideal Protein is a doctor-designed, coach-led ketogenic weight loss protocol that uses food as medicine to empower you to lose weight and live your healthiest life.
And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show, a podcast brought to you by the Livingston Parish News. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys out there joining us today. I think we're going to be sitting down for a threefer. Got plenty to talk about here with this gentleman. We appreciate him taking time out on this Friday morning to come talk with us. I'm going to let him introduce himself real quick. Go ahead, sir.
Buddy Mincey Jr., and good morning, McHugh. It's so great to be here with you today. I'm a state rep from Denham Springs and Walker area, District 71.
Yes, sir, and that is going to be our first topic of conversation is this previous legislative session. We're going to pull a little bit from last year as well, but first we're going to talk about 2022. First and foremost, before we jump into your individual bills, I would recommend folks go back to our website, www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. Back in early March, sat down with you and kind of went through your proposals for this year. Had a lot of success, lots of things to talk about. But first, I kind of want to get your feeling on this because we talked about this as well before you started. 2020 session, even 2021 session, COVID huge in 2020, kind of looming in 2021. This is the first time y'all kind of got to bust out. What was that like?
Well, it was. You're absolutely right. This whole term has been just one emergency, one the disturbance after another with COVID, and then all the storms and ice storms and so forth. And this was a little different. This was the first regular session that we've had. A general session, and we had a lot of legislation, and it was pretty grueling. But it was good. It was good to be back pretty much to normal. It was the first real normal for us. And you had more input from lobbyists. You had more input from the public, which is good. And it was a busy session.
Oh yeah, well, obviously, because we've got quite a bit to go through. So some of these I know that you're going to want to talk more about than others because some of them are, I don't want to say basic, but they speak for themselves.
Right.
Let's start with HB. We're going to start with school stuff,
Right.
which I know is important. For those of you who are curious about some of the talking points, you recently, along with House Speaker Clay Scheck-Snyder, Representative Valerie Hodges, and State Senator Rogers Pope, y'all participated in a forum through the chamber out in Walker. So you had plenty of time to talk about this, and you went quick because you had a lot to talk about. Yeah. So let's start with schools. Let's start with HB 244, school calendar. More local control, I think, is really what you were after here. So tell us about this bill.
Yeah, it was. And let me just tell you one thing. I have a lot of legislation, for education issues. And when I first went to the Capitol, I was very conscious of being stereotyped as the education guy. And I really tried to stay away from some of that because I think I have so much more to offer. I'm on Natural Resources Committee, Ways and Means, and Agriculture Committee. And I think I have a lot to offer in those areas. But the more I tried to stay away from the education focus, I kept getting pulled back into it. And, I got to a point where, look, education is important to our parish. It's our economic engine, in my opinion, still. And so I accepted the fact that that I was the education guy because education is important to my parish. And then I eventually got to a point where I embraced it because I don't think there's anything more important to our state than education. If you look at all the issues that we have, workforce, unemployment, our criminal justice system, our healthcare, everything falls back to education. So I'm real proud to be an education guy, and I have a pretty good list of legislation that we've passed. And this first one, just like you said, it just gives local autonomy to the school system and lets them dictate whether or not they have a year-long calendar or not.
Well, and, that's interesting. Obviously, that's another debate for another time, year-long school or not. A lot of recommendations seem to be kind of coming out of the educational think tanks way up on high. But as you said, some districts might be able to handle it, some might not. That should be their decision. And this unanimous. So you had no opposition to that one. So that's impressive. Yeah. Moving on. Excuse me. We talked about, this is HB 245. We talked about this beforehand. This is a safety issue. I was used to high school kids, right? When I went to go pick up my kid to take him to an appointment or something, they kind of came on out. But this one is more, it's all minors. But when you're going to check kids out, probably a little more strict protocol, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, whenever we have state agencies checking kids out of school, we want to make sure that they have the proper identification. And so this one just simply just requires them to have the proper identification to identify that kid before they check them out.
Right. And going into HB 263, excuse me, this one wasn't quite. It was unanimous in the Senate, 84-15 in the House, but this kind of built on the last one. This is an ongoing check on that protocol to make sure that it's still good and still does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, what we want to have is we want our school systems. There's nothing more important than the safety of our kids while they're at school, and we need to make sure that we're checking them out accordingly. And not all systems have a system where they have the same process. Some of our school systems allow the schools to dictate their process. So this is just a checks and balance. It just makes the school system develop a process to where if it is not a district policy, they evaluate, the superintendent or his designee evaluates those specific ones at the school, and they come up with recommendations and review them periodically.
Sure. Moving on, and a lot of that, I don't want to just put that to the side, but there's been so much conversation about school safety lately, and that just sort of builds on that subject. And of course, school safety came up in the school board meeting last night.
Mm-hmm.
Presentation by Sheriff Jason Ard. Going to be interested to see what Mr. David Gray writes up about that. This one's interesting. Owning a newspaper, I'm big on civics, right? And the next one is HB 423. This was 78-18 in the House, unanimous in the Senate. It's going to require school districts to try to develop a program to get high school seniors to register to vote. Louisiana is a sort of microcosm of the nation at large. Roughly 1/3 of adults are not even registered to vote, and of course, voter turnout is an even separate conversation.
Right.
But tell us where this idea came from, and obviously it passed.
Well, it actually came from the fact that, I had kids in high school for probably 10 years consecutively. And I knew a lot of the students, I knew a lot of the kids. I've always been really engaged in the school system. And when I got ready to campaign for the House, I knew a lot of the families, their kids were not registered. And it was something that struck a chord with me. And it's something that, I don't think there's a greater civic responsibility than to get out and vote. And we, used to have classes in place where a kid reached a senior year, they were registering to vote. That has changed so much because of all the educational opportunities that we have. So there's no specific class a senior year where you could do that in. So this basically just, again, it allows school systems to maintain their autonomy. And it just tells them to create a process to where they allow seniors to register and register to vote, and then they just periodically review it.
So it's going to be interesting to see how that maybe over time will change those voter registration statistics as more and more kids get registered to vote.
We hope so. There's so many updated. You can let them do it on the computer. You can also do the hard copies. The thing about the different resources the different systems have. That's why it's so hard to figure out one specific way. But as long as we have something in place that it already, our schools are a place that's designated by Secretary of State as a place to register to vote. And this makes the school systems put things in place and put processes in place, which will help all that.
Getting into, we don't have to go too deep into it because we're going to be talking about these points over the next 3 points, but teachers, availability of teachers, new teachers is sort of a red flag and a call to action here in Louisiana. I know that's been something that you were focused on moving forward. So first and foremost, let's talk about HB 455. Passes the House 88-10, unanimous in the Senate. Walk us through this. This is a non-public teachers bill.
Yeah, so, Livingston Parish, we have a phenomenal public school system, and we only have one non-public K-12, and that's Open Door Baptist Church. And the pastor there approached me and asked me to help him with some legislation. Currently, non-publics are able to hire, teachers that come from nationally accredited universities. Used to be regionally accredited, but they are able to do it nationally. The non-publics were left out of that. That was changed a few years back. So our non-publics were having to hire teachers. They were limited to hiring their teachers from regionally accredited universities. And all this bill did was just make it consistent with the non-publics and the publics, and allows our, our public school, our school systems like Open Door Baptist Church to hire teachers from, nationally accredited universities.
The teacher training database, this is HB 509, unanimous in both houses. So congratulations on that. This is teacher training is a huge red button. Let's call it that, a red button issue. A lot of folks are saying, well, they need more training. Teachers are complaining that it might be a little too hampering. Sometimes, it's not affected efficiently or anything like that. This would create a database. Tell us what the purpose of that database is.
Yeah, look, we have, our teachers are just now getting ready to start school, and all of them are going through their updated training. And I don't think of any educator that has training that's going to help them in their profession and help them be better educators. I don't think they'll ever object to that. The problem is that we have legislators that love to put training on teachers, and it's unfunded. And a lot of times it's just specific issues that legislator may have. So, there's an issue with this statewide. We did a resolution last year to have LDOE to study it. And all this does is require LDOE to put together a database and to come back with some recommendations. There are some things that are outdated, some things that can be eliminated, some things that can be reduced. And we're hoping that they can come back with their recommendations for us.
Sure. Last but certainly not least, you already said training is unfunded. And so in HB 510, which was unanimous, you're looking to limit that.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about, that's an oversimplification. Tell us a little bit about this bill.
Well, it really is that simple. If legislators, have something that they specifically want our teachers to get trained on, then fund it. It's just that simple. Fund it or remove something else that's already in place, something that's already existing. We have to stop putting things on our teachers. We need to look for opportunities to take things off of our teachers, and we can start with this one. It's a simple thing, but it means a lot. I can tell you, I bet you can't ask a teacher right now who's getting ready to start up school and ask them about the training, the unfunded training that they're taking, and see if it doesn't strike a nerve with them. But we need to do everything we can to help our teachers.
Moving on, I found this one interesting. This is your Praxis bill, HB 546. I'm going to read it, but it was unanimously passed in both houses. Eliminates the requirement for educational majors to pass a Praxis Core standardized test before entering a teacher education program. So, like you said, a lot of these other legislators like to, add requirements, add this, that, and the other. So of course, we as a country love standardized tests.
Right.
And sometimes those aren't the most efficient.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about what you were hoping to accomplish with this bill.
So, the Praxis Core, 2 years ago, we formed a task force, the teacher task force that look at recovery, retention, and recruitment of our teachers. And, we studied a whole bunch of things, and, we've got some good legislation that come out of that this year, and this is one of them. The Praxis Core is a standardized test that prevents students from entering into an educational program. Now, this bill was I was very proud of it, but I'm also very disappointed in it at this point right now. We'll elaborate on that in a little bit. But, right now, the Praxis Core, so if you can imagine, any industry group or any profession that you go into, that you have to take a standardized test before you even enter into that collegiate program. This is the only profession that requires that. So what we've done is, we identified that this was an issue. LDOE, actually, the Department of Education, actually came to us with a recommendation to eliminate that Praxis Core. They estimate that it cuts 1,000 students a year from entering to the Department of Education. That's 1,000 teachers, potential teachers, every single year that we're losing. And it's just a barrier. There's no indication that it makes a teacher more effective or more efficient teacher. So we have eliminated that. Now, the one thing we didn't eliminate was at the end of it, you still have the Praxis Core content. So you still, if you think about an attorney who has to take their boards and stuff like that, they take them at the end of their collegiate programs or their undergrads or their graduate programs. The same thing with our teachers. They still take the Praxis Core. Now, during this process, it was also identified that before teachers become certified, they had to meet a English proficiency requirement, and that English proficiency was being satisfied by Core, the Praxis Core. So Department of Education, which was supported by Superintendent Kate Brumley, they came to us and said, let's eliminate that Praxis Core from that certification requirement too, and we did. So unanimous, and in the Senate, and we got it passed, and the governor signed it, and then now it goes to Bessie. So Bessie they had their bulletins set up to where they were just doing what the legislation required. We removed the legislation. Our legislative intent was for that to go away. So Bessie has came out and said, well, we're going to honor half of it. We're going to honor the half that prevents students from entering into the educational program, but we're still going to make them take it before they can become certified. So now what they're saying is that we've got teachers who go through their collegiate programs and they pass the Praxis content. They got to go back and pass the Praxis Core to establish their English proficiency, which is just ludicrous. You've gone through. It
sounds ludicrous, just you sitting there talking about it.
It is absolutely ludicrous, and there's a perception that we're trying to dumb down our teachers, which is absolutely not true. There's no correlation between Praxis Core making somebody an efficient and effective teacher, and we're hoping that Bessie does the right thing. They're having a meeting August the 24th to address both components. Bessie president has done an emergency waiver on the entry part, and we're hoping that the Bessie gets it right and does it for the whole thing. So that's one that we haven't got finally resolved. Legislatively we have, but we've got to convince Bessie to do the right thing.
So that was a lot.
Yes.
But a lot of barriers to entry there.
Correct.
And, not everybody, it's been scientifically proven, not everybody is good at taking standardized tests.
Absolutely.
But as you said, you're trying to open the door for more teachers, which of course is kind of been a call to action across the state. Next is something that I know that you have brought individuals into Livingston Parish to tour schools to talk about the career and technical education,
Mm-hmm.
Especially with the new Center for Denham Springs High School. Of course, the breadth of programs at Walker High, and I know Live Oak High is getting involved in that as well. So one of the things that you're looking to do is sort of expand that, sort of almost as like as a pre-technical college sort of path. HCR 81, excuse me. The idea is to set up some sort of task force, I believe you call it.
Correct.
Yes. To identify programs across the state. How do you envision this working?
So, I've brought a lot of people to tour our schools, and just because of my district is the Denham Springs Walker area, and just for geographical issues, logistics, we typically hit the Denham Springs High School and the Walker High School, and I'm showing them what the quality of education that we have in our parish. I'm very proud of our school system. And we could take a tour to any of our schools and see the quality of education that we're doing throughout the parish. But we specifically have been hitting those two. And Walker High School, there's no secret, they're doing a phenomenal job with their career and technical education, their CTE programs. And at the end of every single tour, every group says, "How can we reproduce this?" Well, that's a really complicated question, and we talk about it at the end of every single one. So it led me to form a task force. We've got 19 stakeholders from across the state, and we're going to use Walker as a model, but there are other school systems that are doing some phenomenal things across the state, and we're going to try to find out what's working and how, and then we're going to try to duplicate that and try to put things in place to where we can have a better career and technical education pipeline to our workforce.
And, workforce programs have been a big push really going back to your school board days.
Absolutely.
And it's been a big push here.
Mm-hmm.
North Shore Technical and Community College has worked in tandem with Southeastern. They have campuses on Florida Boulevard and Burgess sort of backed up to each other over there on the west side of Walker. There it is. Wrapping up the education slate for your bills, standardized testing, and especially state costs. So tell us, wrap this up for us.
Yeah, you're going to see there's a series of resolutions here. We're looking at our standardized our testing. We're looking at our the accountability. All these things cost a lot of money, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of energy on it. And it's questionable at times where, if we're getting our bang for the buck, and we're constantly looking at moving the needle, and we're expending a tremendous amount of resources in these areas. So I passed, I think 4 or 5 resolutions that actually makes the state come back and identify those things. And so they can come back and give us a cost, and then we can do some evaluation to see if they're really effective, if they're working, and see if we need to make any changes. And just take a moment to talk about resolutions. So resolutions are a legislative tool, and a lot of times people use them as a tool just to appease a concern that they may have, or somebody may ask them to do something. A lot of times, just the death of a bill goes through, and a bill's not having any luck. They make a resolution out of it. I take a different approach. I think resolutions are an effective tool to gather data and substantiate future legislation. So out of the 10 bills that I passed last year, 6 of them come from resolutions that I previously had passed. I think I passed 19 pieces of legislation total. I think 9 of them come from resolutions. So the resolutions are effective. They're an effective tool. And I've got quite a few of them that trying to identify some things so we can assess our cost.
And I lied. We still have a couple more education bills to talk about. Moving on to page 2. But that is a good point because we're actually specifically, I think some people are going to like what you have to say later on in the show about some of the resolutions you passed in 2021 and how that affected some bills that were passed.
Correct.
This year. So let's wrap up your resolutions in education before we move on. HR 140, unanimous pass. Interesting here. It goes back to what you said. A lot of these legislators have individual grievances or personal ideas. Mm-hmm. Might not necessarily be negative about what schools should do. If I'm reading this correctly, this is supposed to give the Department of Education a chance to review that before implementation.
This is the curriculums, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, legislators like to pass legislation to put training on teachers, and they also like to pass legislation to put curriculum things in place. And most of the times, we're really not qualified to do that. So, all we're doing is asking LDOE to evaluate existing curriculum changes and come up with some suggestions. It's almost like the training. We need to get a handle on what we've got. And then we need to evaluate. There needs to be a vetting process before we make, as legislators, before we make curriculum changes. We need to have a vetting process, and this is what this resolution does: is ask LDOE to give us some suggestions.
So, and as you said, that's going to be data gathering.
Correct.
You'll be liaising with them until you come up with something that you can all agree upon. Because obviously, you're not trying to cut your fellow legislators' opinion off or anything like that. You just want to make sure that what is implemented is effective, correct?
Yeah, I think this session alone, you probably had 6 or 8 pieces of legislation that were trying to introduce curriculum changes and specific things into curriculum. And sometimes, we need to let our school system struggles, and we need to let our educators educate, and we need to have a process in place where we can vet that a little better.
Getting into, this is another sort of back and forth between the feds, the state, local school districts. HR 174, it's the cost of accountability.
Correct.
There's all sorts of metrics, things that have to be submitted, that kind of thing. Tell us what sort of data you're hoping to gather from this particular one.
Again, we just want to capture the cost of what it's costing us and see what our gain is. We keep trying to, I think, in my opinion, browbeat our school systems, and they keep changing the accountability. We just went through a series of accountability sessions from Bessie. The first 3 of the sessions, they were closed doors and not involved any public comment or any public input. The next couple of sessions, they had them publicly because the Attorney General told them that they had to, but they allowed no public input, no comment section. So only the last meeting, is my understanding, that they actually allowed some public input. And so we've got Bessie members that are doing things in accountability, and it's costing our state and our school systems a lot of money. And we need to assess what that is and really evaluate what it's producing for us.
So you actually already touched on it. Your next bill, which is a resolution 175, you're looking to collect the cost of how much it's taking to do standardized testing.
Correct.
In the classroom. So I guess you're looking for the same deal there, just sort of a cost analysis.
Absolutely. And if you look at our high schools, just assess our high schools. Our accountability for our high schools is 25% based on ACT. The ACT is not aligned with the current high school public education curriculum that we have. So think about that. We're spending all this money, to assess something that doesn't align with the curriculum that we're teaching. And so there's issues with ACT, but there's also just issues in general with the amount of resources that we're taking away from standardized testing, and we need to evaluate that. We need less testing.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Standardized testing.
Yeah, I had I had one that just graduated a year and 3 months ago from Denham High, and one who was going through the junior high. And once you get to the end of the year, all of a sudden everything's very stressful.
Correct.
Because it's tests for what you're going to do next year, and test. I remember when I was in school, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. We had the standardized tests, but they lasted 2 days. And it was over. That was it. So I suppose, from my personal opinion, I agree with you, for what it's worth.
Well, and look, I just want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that we don't have some form of assessment. We just need to evaluate the cost of it and what are we getting, what are returns, and we need to do a true assessment of that, and see if we need to make any changes.
And as you said, especially compared to what your current curriculum is. I mean, if it doesn't match up, what's the point?
Correct.
So last, again, HR 176 is the cost of curriculum development, and of course, this sort of stacks on everything that came before it. What are you expecting to do here? Because I know that there's a lot of confusion between sort of this and what the public sees, right? Because curriculum development is hard; it's an intense process, and you're trying to keep up with what these federal standards are, what state standards are. So tell us what you're hoping to gather here.
Well, curriculum's big money, and we have a lot of vendors who are out of state and who are capitalizing on our curriculum changes. And again, this is just another way of us to just assess that and see what the actual cost is, and see if we can do anything about it.
So that wraps up the education portion quite a bit there. But we don't want to buttonhole you into being the education guy.
Right.
There's plenty more to talk about. So y'all hold on to your seats, because we are going to be getting into, first and foremost, disaster recovery, and then we're going to be jumping into drainage, flooding, and that sort of thing. First and foremost, let's talk about, this is a bill, House Bill 740, disaster recovery. It is unanimous in its passage. Establishes that the diversion, sale, transport, delivery, or acceptance of fuels, and we talked about this before the session. This was fascinating to me. I didn't know. Including propane across jurisdictional boundaries within the state shall not be restricted or prohibited. So I think a lot of people would be like, oh my God, that was restricted or prohibited. So let's start there. How'd you find out about this? And then, how did you work through getting this passed? Because I'm sure there were people who were against it.
Yeah, it's after Hurricane Ida, helping a lot of the rural parts of our parish, trying to reach out to municipalities and even individuals to see if we can help them. It was a common theme that, everybody, a lot of those communities are run off propane anyway. And then a lot of them have generators. So everybody was running out of their propane about the same time, and they could not get them refueled because of some jurisdictional issues. This wasn't this person's area and that person's area. So we, the target of the bill was addressing propane, and we opened it up to all fuels. So basically, if we're recovering, if we're in an emergency type situation, we cannot have something like a jurisdictional issue limiting us from providing services to our people.
So in this, it should help, because I'm sure, everybody remembers after Ida. I think the rumor mill got a little bigger than what the actual experience was. But for the first few days after, I mean, you were waiting an hour and a half just to get gas.
That's correct.
Very difficult. So should help open up those channels going forward. Getting into, this is obviously still a hot button issue. Coming up in about 2 weeks, we're at 6 years since the Great Flood. And, we're talking here about Amite River those sorts of things. But first, I want you to talk about the fact gathering and data gathering you did through your resolutions in 2021. And I believe that's House Resolution 46 and 82. 46 dealing with the Amite River Basin, and 82 dealing with, of course, the I-12 barrier. So tell us a little bit about last year before we jump into this year.
Yeah, that's another real good example of resolutions that one of them has already, it resulted in some very good legislation that we'll talk about that we passed in 2022, and the other one is pending a study. But the first one, the Amite River Basin Commission, I think it was established in 1981, 1983, somewhere around there. And its focus, it was created statutorily. The floodplain was created statutory and given a lot of authority to fix floodplain issues in the Amite River Basin. And unfortunately, the only thing that really has come out of it was the Comet River diversion. And the only reason the Comet River diversion is close, is in the process of being, completed construction-wise, is Congressman Graves got it funded. But we had a missed opportunity, in my opinion. That commission was focused really a lot on the Comet whenever they were empowered to address the entire basin, which is a 7-parish basin. So we asked CPRA last year to assess the Amite River Basin Commission and come up with some suggestions. And one of my pieces of legislation covered those suggestions. The other one I think was HCR 82. Maybe we did it. It was on Interstate Barrier. We talked about this before, but the Interstate Barrier flooded. It made it compounded the flooding north of the interstate in Denham Springs and Walker. There was no solution to that Interstate Barrier. We have tasked DOTD with studying that and giving us a suggestion so we can try to improve that. And that study is supposed to be done at the fall of this year. But that's the two bills that we did last year, and of course we did some in this next section.
So yeah, let's talk about those. First, let's get into HB 686, which is the Amite River Basin. This was unanimous. The Amite River Basin Commission has existed since the 80s. Mm-hmm. Actually, my dad was there, one of the founding members signing on the dotted line. Unfortunately, lost the charter in the flood, as it lost a lot of things in the flood.
Right.
But at any rate, and I bet a lot of people out there would be like, no, he wasn't. Yeah, I promise you he was. Red-faced and all, I saw him at dinner a lot, mad because you passed this because the commission had kind of lost their way. But there is nothing in the state that existed like this did.
That's correct.
So tell us what you were hoping to affect or what you're looking to move forward with House Bill 686.
So as a result of the resolution, CPRA did a phenomenal job of, evaluating and interviewing, everybody involved in the Amite River Basin, including the commission members and so forth. And they came up with, 4 or 5 pages of recommendations of things that we can do to improve it. So, the Amite River Basin Commission, the Amite River Basin legislation was in place. It is the only one in the state, and it was a really good instrument. And we basically just made a ton of improvements to it and made it a better piece of legislation. And, for example, we've added a Pontchartrain Levee District into the commission, non-voting members, but they're a part of the commission. We've added the CPRA to it as well. We've done a lot of changes to take a good piece of legislation and make it much better. And we will be focused on, we created a qualifications for our commissioners, and there's a 7-year qualification, and they have to have civil engineering, floodplain management, project management type backgrounds of 7 years to be able to be qualified. So we're in a process right now of working towards filling those spots. And we took a something that was of its own, and we really made it something that's going to be a lot better. That hopefully, and the emphasis is going to be able to, we want to put things in place that not just a specific project, but to cover the whole basin, and we have the perfect instrument to do it.
When are you hoping to finish that?
The new commissioners will start January 1. Of course, there'll be a transition place, in place there. But we've done some other things with some funding to help that, and we're working on the transition piece of it right now.
Right. So it's going to be interesting to catch up with you. Maybe we'll do a twofer before next year's session.
Yeah.
We'll see how the first quarter goes for those new commissioners.
Yep.
getting into a couple of resolutions, of course, trying to gather some data here. First and foremost, dredging of the Amite River. This is very, very interesting because a lot of people think you just go bid it out and go do it. But there's a lot more actually when you get into the Amite River. It's a designated floodway, and so the EPA is involved, DEQ, the state, the feds. So tell us a little bit about what you were, kind of hoping for this resolution. What kind of data you're hoping to get?
Yeah, McHugh, I think it's been 50, 60 years since anything's been done with Amite River, and nobody likes studies, including myself. But you can't do anything without going through the proper process, and we have to study things to evaluate their environmental impact. We have to study things to evaluate the cost-benefit analysis. We have to do everything you can to check a whole bunch of boxes before you can even go out for funding. So the first part of any really significant process is to study it and to assess it. And this resolution just asks, it tasks the Amite River Basin with doing it, but in conjunction with CPRA. And they're working on this right now. So, we're going to go through and assess, what it would take and study what it would take to dredge the Amite River. And then it's not only just the Amite River, but it's also the confluent areas of the Amite River where it dumps into the Lake Maurepas. It's also asked CPRA to look at, erosion control on the southern border of Livingston Parish at Lake Maurepas, and also as well as surge protection. And I think another part of this too is it asked them to study the effects of our surrounding parishes. Everybody's got rocks and everybody's got pumps, and they're doing different levees and doing different things because they have better resources than we do, and we need to assess those and see how it's impacting us. So this resolution asked them to study all those things and come back with a report for us.
Going to be interesting to see what that data turns out. So HR 156, this is the Amite River Basin funding. This is interesting because the Amite River Basin Commission does have a millage on the books, collects a couple $100,000 a year. This one is, you're looking more federally, correct?
Correct.
So tell us what kind of data you're hoping to get from this.
Yeah, so the millages that were in place before were set aside, for matching funds. But of course, when Congressman Graves was able to get the commit diversion funded, that took care of those funds. But that millage is no longer in place. But we want our federal delegation. We're working with Congressman Graves on this. We want them to be out there trying to solicit and secure funding for us for projects in the Amite River Basin. So this is just basically a resolution to them and asking them to go after some funding for us.
Gotcha. Well, and I guess in this case, it's kind of giving them the green light, right?
Yes.
So this one is interesting. We've talked about it in the past. Lots of information in the paper on it, but it's Louisiana Watershed Initiative. It's run out of CPRA, I believe, or is it the Department of Community Development?
There's about 6 departments: DOTD, the Wildlife and Fisheries. Everybody's in part of it.
So this is sort of a group effort, but it's divided into 9 regions across the state. We just happened here to get placed in the same district as Tangi, Washington, and St. Tammany. But this particular one, it's kind of looking to piggyback on how the Amite River Basin Commission was set up. It's nothing of its like in Louisiana. So I believe the data you're looking for is, can the Amite River Basin have its own watershed designation, correct?
That is correct. So Congressman Graves was very instrumental in securing, the funding that went into the Louisiana Watershed Initiative, the LWI program. They secured $1.2 billion. Half of that, $600 million, was supposed to be designated to the 10 most impacted areas, which Livingston Parish is a part of that. And they actually divided the state up into 8 regions to help them administer that. So, and then in those 8 regions, you've actually got an administration, if you will, commissioners or board members who are assessing that region and determining what they're going to do in that specific region, and including going after funding. And so here we are. We've got a perfect instrument in place for the only floodplain this in-state statutes and then we're going to create another bureaucratic level above us. That this Region 8, we're part of Region 8, there's actually 6 floodplains in there. So, our argument is that we should have our own. My colleagues back in 2019, with the assistance of Congressman Graves, requested LWI to give us our own region, and they were not successful at that point. So I wanted to revisit this as something that was of importance to me. And so we've actually passed a resolution to ask LWI to give the Ament River Basin its own region. And I got with Senator White, and he passed a similar resolution on the Senate side. So the legislative will is there. It's unanimous on both houses. And we've actually met with the LWI folks, and I think we may be successful there. I'm hopeful that we're going to be successful there.
Well, and it already exists as its own entity and its own watershed, so should be it makes sense. But you can also understand from their perspective, and probably the perspective of the other stakeholders in Region 8, why they wouldn't want that separated. Going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Anything else you'd like to make a comment on about the 2022 session before we take a quick little break and move on to some more specific flood protection things in another episode?
No, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. I think we had a very successful session, and we're already working on what we can do in the next session.
Well, thank you, sir. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for this episode before we move on?
Again, I'm Representative Buddy Mincey Jr., represent District 71, which is the Denham Springs and the Walker area.
And my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate this gentleman for joining us on a Friday morning. That's 1 down, 2 to go. We'll be taking a quick break. This one will be coming out Monday, so you probably maybe listening to it on a Monday, and then we're going to have the next one on Tuesday and the other one on Wednesday. So we do hope you enjoy all these shows. Please remember the news is on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We are once a week in print on Thursdays at $7 a month to get that in your mailbox. We're also online, www.livingstonparishnews.com. We appreciate you joining us. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.